If you've ever thought to yourself, I'd rather just read about this than actually do it, you're not alone. The Enneagram 5 newsletter exists to help you move from knowing to experiencing. Every Saturday, you'll get insights designed to help fives grow without overwhelm. Sign up for free today at enneagram5.com/newsletter or visit the link in the description. Now on to the show.
So Cody,
Yeah.
when was the last time you felt like you actually had your shit together?
Never. I've never felt that way.
My name is, and I'm an Enneagram 5.
My name is, and I'm an Enneagram 5.
My name is, and I'm an Enneagram
5.
So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about integration versus disintegration, which I will say, you told me we were talking about this about 6 hours ago, and I was really excited about it. And then I read the descriptions and realized that I've spent more time in disintegration than integration, and this conversation is going to be a little bit more comfortable than I thought it was going to be for myself.
That's always my goal, actually.
Well, I mean,
Just make things uncomfortable for you.
it's going to work. It's going to work this time. Yeah. Really leaning into my 6 wing on those things.
So if you look at the Enneagram and there are all these lines all over the place, for people who aren't familiar with this concept, if you look
It's not the devil.
it's not a pentagram, it's an Enneagram. And if you look at the 5, there are 2 lines coming off of it. One goes to a 7 and one goes to the 8. And so as 5s, the idea is we disintegrate to 7 in stress or fear or insecurity, that sort of thing, right? And
Yeah.
In strength and I guess confidence, whatever the opposite of those things I just said are, we integrate towards an 8.
Yeah, I tend to want to say like the healthier side, but I don't want to use that word because I don't
think it's a good descriptor.
Although when I read these descriptions, which I think we planned on doing, it's going to sure sound like that. It will be that way in my life. I will say that. I think that when I am disintegrating to a 7, it's usually in really not good times in my life. I have found that some of my favorite memories have occurred when I'm disintegrating to a 7.
Yeah, me too, probably.
Yeah. And some of my least favorite memories are probably when I'm integrating to an 8, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that could be fun to kind of delve into. But yeah, I think that in general, if we're looking at it in kind of more black and white terms, typically disintegration is when I'm the most unhealthy, I think. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. It's a spectrum, as everything is with the Enneagram. So, who knows?
Yeah, and we'll get into this a bit because I think that it can reflect the different sort of levels of health or development that we're at, but it's not necessarily like a symptom of it, I guess, the way that I view it. And, we've said this probably a million times at this point, but we're not Enneagram experts, right? So
by any means. Yeah.
we have sort of a cursory understanding of the Enneagram, but our goal for this show is to share our experiences and the community's experiences of like what it's like to be a 5. So we'll do our best to kind of navigate this.
Well, and I think it's fair to say that we don't talk about the Enneagram directly unless it frames a conversation in which we can talk about our own experiences in a way that makes it more conversational, right? So like, we're not talking about this because we're talking about the Enneagram. We're talking about it as just the framework for our own experiences. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, in my mind, that's the way that I can get into this conversation and not feel inferior. So that's how I'm choosing to frame it in my own mind, at least.
Yeah, that's a good life hack there. I like it.
Yeah,
and we'll get into it a bit more. Why I think that there are healthy ways to disintegrate to a 7. I think I've experienced that, and then I would say as you were talking, I was thinking there actually might be unhealthy ways to integrate to an 8.
Definitely.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So we can talk about that. Where do you want to start? Tell me, tell me how, tell me all your terrible stories of disintegrating to a 7.
Let's start with what disintegrating actually looks like
All right.
for a 5.
Yep.
The textbook version of it, we shall say.
And where are we sharing this from?
We are sharing it from, it's not going to sound like a super solid, this was just the best description I found while Googling for 5 minutes. But I found it from, we're going to be reading from psychologyjunkie.com.
Oh boy.
And what it says is when 5s experience stress, they withdraw and obsess over their hobbies and unique interests. See, right here, I'm already like, fuck. Like, anyway, they retreat from others and fear that they won't be able to accomplish anything that they set their mind to. Their world seems to shrink and they become overwhelmed by dark fears and anxieties. Escaping from other people and gathering their energy becomes a singular goal. As stress continues, 5s integrate to 7. When this happens, they seek...
Disintegrate to 7.
Did I say integrate?
Yeah.
5s disintegrate to 7. When this happens, they seek diversion and pleasure. Normally withdrawn, now they become impulsive and act out their desires. They act out their desires recklessly.
Cody can't read.
I can't read and speak at the same time. This is taking me back to like Sunday school days when they make me read scripture out loud, and I would always freeze, and I'd be like, "Am I saying the words right?" And I wouldn't say them right.
And you like disassociate from your body.
Just like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. Anyway, there's only two more sentences. They may dabble in sex, drugs, and thrill-seeking activities. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They try to convince themselves that they are okay and compartmentalize their anxieties and stressors. So basically every day of my fucking life. So that's the beginning part of this. Yeah, I just, there's so many stories that I can talk about that I've probably talked about on this podcast or on our subscriber podcast, our alternate podcast, where I just, pretty much anytime that I am really upset about something, I'm probably disintegrating to 7. And then during that time, but one thing I can definitely think about is whenever I am my whole live stream fiasco.
Yeah.
Whenever I decided that it was a good idea to live stream myself doing anything, I went down this very dark rabbit hole of trying to figure out how exactly to make that happen. And there's hundreds of parts that make that happen. I'm exaggerating, but there are lots of tiny little pieces to making a live stream look and feel right. And of course, I'm a perfectionist and I want it to be amazing. And so my production value on episode 1 of whatever it is I was doing, my music podcast in the beginning, was better than like 80% of the people out there. At least it sounded and looked better. And it was because I spent a lot of the time doing all of the research and the knowledge, gaining all that knowledge before I would launch it, before I would do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And getting all those pieces and all the cables and the connectors and all the equipment that I would need, which fed into this podcast at the time, because a lot of the equipment we use for this is actually what stuff I also use for live streaming. So multifunctional in that way. It's crazy to me when I think back at that time and I'm like, God, I was so obsessed with trying to make it work that I forgot. I was thinking about it when I was working at my day job at the time. I was thinking about it walking home from work. I was thinking about it when I was talking to Madison about whatever, having dinner. I was thinking about having to solve those problems. And so the very first sentence that I said, what was it about, like getting obsessed with hobbies and like closing out the world and forgetting anything else exists?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's me periodically. And I will say too, like there are some bipolar tendencies in there that feed into that for sure. In fact, I've over the weekend was feeling a lot of that and feeling that a little now. So we're catching me on an upswing right now. And so, I've been obsessed about it just in the last 48 hours all over again, because now I'm having issues with my live stream for video gaming, and video gaming. What am I, 40? And so
you say like that like it's so far away from where you are now.
No, I want it to be so bad.
How old am I? 4 years from now?
Hey, 5, calm down. I'm not 46 yet, or 46, 36. So yeah, I just I get really obsessed over certain hobbies for sure. And I think about things all the time, and I spend money I don't have on equipment and things that I need for these things that don't matter, that I get obsessed with for sure. Like definitely. I think that it's so easy for me to get like sucked into these tasks and these menial things that don't actually matter in the real world. And sometimes that is my escapism, right? Like that is my thing. But I was more obsessed over live streaming and all that. And that was right in the beginning of 2020. That was right in the middle of everything coming apart, unraveling in society. We didn't know what was happening. Everybody was having to be locked in. And I was still an essential worker out in the world and not sure what was going on, or if I was putting my own life at risk. Who even knew? So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to lose myself in this live stream and see what happens. Can't play music anywhere, so might as well do that. And what I found is that I became very obsessive, compulsive about that, and in a way that was very unhealthy. And I went down a hole for like 6 weeks trying to figure out how to make that happen. And then it was like the thing that I did every few nights at 9 p.m. And so, yeah, that was probably the first thing that popped into my mind when talking about disintegration, and like the first sentence of that description that I read about just getting obsessed with hobbies. And I was just like, yeah, I do that a lot, actually. But it's in a rhythm. It's a rhythmic thing. It's a pattern, a cyclical thing, I should say.
So when you're in the state, because one of the things that they talk about in Disintegrating to 7 is you kind of just become reckless and throw caution to the wind, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So how does that fit into your streaming fiasco?
It doesn't. It does fit into other parts of my life and other phases in my life, but it doesn't. That was probably my outlet for that at that time. And maybe it takes different shapes as I get older, or I'm in different phases in life, but I've definitely acted impulsively in the past and done things that were super reckless or self-sabotaging because I just didn't care, or maybe like the thrill of not caring and not caring what was going to happen to me because I care so much, so often, so all the time, right? I'm super self-preserving in that way, and always am cautious and always concerned with the worst case scenario of all things. Like that's where I really lean into my 6 wing a lot for that. And I say that, but this is where I'm definitely still a 5 in the sense that like I can be like, if a trip is coming up and I should be packing and I should be doing all these things, and I'm thinking about all the things that I'm going to need and making lists. I'll make checklists in my notes app on my iPhone and like all these things. And then I don't do any of it. Because I procrastinate because I care about all the other things instead that I'm more interested in or whatever. And everything else feels more important until the night before the trip. And then I'm putting everything together. And I'm a big dreader too, which I guess is part of my 6 wing. And so I dread everything up until the day of. And then is like the moment that, like, say I'm going on a trip and flying somewhere, the moment that I leave the door of my home to the airport, I no longer care. I'm just like, well, it's over now. Like, here we go. I'm on the ride. Whatever I forgot, and we're just going. And so, but I dread everything. 2 weeks before that, I'm like, do I need these things? Do I need these things? Then I get there, and I'm like, damn it, I didn't remember the things that I was supposed to. So it's a vicious cycle in that way. But yeah, I mean, in my past, especially, like, God, I was so reckless. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll for sure. All three of those things. Well, drugs actually, as we know, anybody who's been with us for a little while since the first season knows. It's like drugs was more later in life for me, but yeah, sex and rock and roll since I was a teenager.
A good example of a time I have disintegrated towards 7 is the entire process of getting my licensure as a therapist. It required grad school, it required an internship, and it required working under people who have different ideas on how therapy should be done and what therapy looks like and what a healthy therapist looks like. And it all kind of culminates in this feeling of being evaluated is the word I want to use, but it feels more like judgment, being judged on how much you know and how much you can put into practice what you know. And that is a very chaotic space for me. It was also a space where I didn't have the capacity to be able to do a good work-life balance. And so it was, you just keep going towards the end goal, and then you get to rest and you get to recluse at the end of it. And it presents very much as a scattered ADHD, let me do all of these things, let me hyperfixate on one game or one book, but also let me do as many things as I can so I don't have time to stop and think about how chaotic and how unhealthy I am being right now. I spent my entire childhood in my 7 and a little bit of my early adulthood as well, to the point where my childhood friends, once we found the Enneagram, they all said, "Oh, I bet you're a 7." And that was just because I was in such stress and survival mode all the time as a child that all I could manage to do was tread water, because beneath the surface of that water, that's where all the feelings were. And I did not have the support, the help, the tools to sort through them. I was a child. So I would wear super bright colors, be performative and silly and loud, like hilarious theater kid, extremely likable. I was popular, and I was also extremely lonely and conscious of it. I felt like I was not allowed to be myself. Like the second I was myself, I was at risk. And part of that was from my own feelings. And part of that was knowing that I had leaned into this 7 personality for so long that if I stopped acting that way, it would be jarring to my friends. And it would be such a stark contrast to go from 7 to my authentic, quiet, intellectual 5 self that I would potentially then just get mistreated more for standing out. So it was a very wild, weird time, and it took years of therapy to learn how to transition that. And it took letting go a lot of friends who didn't accept who I really was as well. But yeah, my entire childhood was just very fake it till you make it and stay as busy as you can to avoid however I was being treated at home or, anything like that.
Yeah, I went about the disintegration in a bit of a different way, I think, because, we've talked about this, I think, on the religion episode, the way that we grew up pretty conservative. And so sex and drugs and rock and roll,
Sending you straight to hell.
yeah, all that stuff. While I would not have admitted it at the time. I was curious about those things for sure. I did not partake. Instead, what I did was I got really into like binge watching stuff before binge watching stuff was cool. So before, like Netflix.
Just an unhealthy hermit.
Yeah. So like before Netflix was like a thing, I would download.
What a time.
Sketchily download like all kinds of stuff and
Sketchily. We're going to admit that into the dictionary of the Enneagram 5 podcast.
burn them onto video CD-ROMs that could be played on my modded Xbox. And then
Wow.
my brother's modded Xbox, because he was into that part of it.
Yeah.
And I would just like binge watch TV shows and anime. And so like, I think that this idea of the kind of letting loose in that way lets you sort of disengage your mind and just kind of stop thinking, but in a way that just is much more chaotic and destructive. That was my method for doing that. I have this kind of superhuman ability to like go into a TV show if it's any good and get lost in it. And that's why I don't like, we've talked about this. I don't like trailers because I don't want to know anything about it. I just want to experience it, and then I can like make determinations about it and come up with theories and all that stuff. I don't want to know anything about most things. I don't want to know anything about going in. Like if I know I'm going to see the movie, I don't want to watch the trailer. The only time I watch the trailer is if I'm on the fence on whether or not I want to see the movie. I could just get lost in that and disengage. And in lieu of not, drinking or doing drugs or anything like that, I was able to use that to kind of dull my senses and, experience a different world outside of the world that I was in.
So what you're saying is you were a nerd.
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit.
I was the homeschool nerd also, but I just somehow also still, slept with all the girls from public school.
And this is how bad it got. So one of my friends, when I was in my second year of college, I think, I was still living in my parents' basement, going to community college, and one of my friends got me into Lost. All right. And he gave me the first 2 seasons on DVD and on a Sunday evening. And I worked at the school. I worked where I went to school. So I was I was on I was in the IT department there. And so I would often go to class and then I'd get out of class and I would just go walk over and go to work. And so I'd spend most of my time at school. And so I started watching Sunday night, probably around 9:00, stayed up all night, skipped school and work the next day,
Yeah.
slept through that, got up again, continued, finished season 1, started season 2, went all the way through, stayed up all night, skipped school and work the second day on Tuesday, and then finished season 2 somewhere, in the middle of the night, when like early Wednesday morning around 3 or 4 a.m.
If that's not imploding your life, I don't know what is.
Skip school and work on Wednesday.
Oh my God. You're like, does school even matter anymore? I'm not going back. After 3 days, I would never go back.
Skip school and work on Wednesday. And that morning, I texted my friend who lent me the first 2 seasons. And I was like, hey, do you have season 3 by chance?
Yeah.
And he was like, no, but my buddy does. And I'm meeting up with him. I'll see him at church tonight so I can get it and, bring it over tonight. And I was like, that's not going to work. And so I went to Walmart and I bought for like $40. I
You're
bought
like, can you get season 4 though?
season 4 wasn't out yet.
It'll take me. Oh, okay. Okay.
So I went and bought it and I binged that all the way through and skipped school and work on Thursday and Friday.
So you didn't go to school or work an entire week?
Entire week.
What was your excuse for work?
I was sick.
How sick were you?
I don't know.
Yeah, I was in the hospital. I had to be like hooked up to IV for at least 2 days.
Needless to say, I didn't have that job that much longer after that. But that was,
Do you remember what job it was at that time?
I was working at the school. I was at the AID department. Yeah.
You were also kicked out of school. Oh man, that is crazy. Yeah, I don't think I've ever gone that deep into like that space. For sure, mine has always been. Oddly enough, I don't. This is the weird thing for me. It's like I feel like a lot of my impulsive and self-sabotaging, like complete disregard for my own well-being decisions have always been more loud and public than that. Mine has never been such a journey of solitude into what is going to wreck my life. I had those too, but
well,
sure. But even when I was younger though, like I just never really had that. I don't think. I definitely, when I was 13 and 14, back when downloading illegally music was like the thing to do. It was like the rage.
LimeWire, Napster.
No, before that, Napster. Yeah, Napster. And then I never did LimeWire. I did do, what was it after Morpheus, I guess.
Okay.
And so.
Did you play them on your Winamp player?
No.
Like custom skins? I was totally into that for a while.
I think I just went straight to burning them to disk.
Okay.
So I could play them in my car. My 1989 Buick Skylark.
Nice.
Yeah. Which I drove that thing until it had no brakes. And then I drove my granny's car, which was I think another Buick or Chrysler, but it was like basically the same car, just a couple years newer until that car didn't drive anymore. But yeah, needless to say, and you know what though? Neither one of those had CD players. I have no idea I was playing music in those cars. I know that eventually I had an iPod.
Well, I wonder.
Tape adapter.
Yeah, well, I wonder if you had like a CD player with a tape adapter.
Oh, man, I hope so. I hope that I was.
I definitely had that at one point.
I guess I had to have, and then an iPod came along eventually, and then when I remember using the dial, the
little
wheel
spinny dial.
Yeah, I had one of those. But yeah, so that was and that was revolutionary. I could put so many songs in my car at once.
Wasn't that like part of our bonding? Was we had like the same phone and the same iPod and the same backpack?
Yeah, what was that phone? Do you remember?
It was the flip phone where you could flip it one way. I think it was Motorola. You could flip it up or you could flip it to the side.
Oh,
it has like a little tiny keyboard.
Yeah,
like
little
a tiny little. Oh man,
get the thumb cramps. I remember that. Yeah,
yeah.
Texting whoever the girl was of the week for me at that time. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was probably, we basically definitely very quickly decided we were the same person in the beginning, which we're definitely not the same person, but we do compliment each other.
But we're probably closer to the same person than any other people that we know
and that we had met at that time.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. And I had just gotten out of like having a whole teenage band of people for so long at that point that when I met you that were nothing like me, that it was really nice to have little did I know my brother was exactly like me in so many ways, as we all know, I think, at this point, except smarter and more focused on science. But it's funny to think about back all the way to that time, like what we would have focused on versus like what people probably like implode on now or disintegrate to now in our like what would it even look like now? I don't even know. I guess it looks like live streaming and getting into like techie things for me.
Oh, for me, it's like going down conspiracy theory rabbit holes and like researching UFOs. And
yeah, fuck yeah, dude. You're right.
That's totally what it is.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I don't even know what mine is these days. I think I've like cornered myself into like a very boring place because I know that I can wreak very much deep and widespread havoc on my life that involves many people if I'm not careful, because I've done that many times in my life. When I was younger, mine was always, and this is what I was saying, with the six wing, it's very interesting to me that this would be the case because of my deep-seated levels of anxiety. And you would not think that it would be so public, but I loved the public aspect of it, like going out and doing things that were crazy, breaking hearts and making them insane and making that very public. I one time drove a girl so crazy that she showed up at my work, which at the time was a sunglass hut in the middle of a mall. And I take full responsibility for her behavior, where she was so crazy, she like faked being pregnant and went and did like a full breakdown in the middle of a mall where everybody could see, just to see if she could like make me.
I think I've heard that story before.
Make me embarrassed, I guess. I don't know. The goal was unknown. Yeah, I drove her insane from the back and forth, which I mean, honestly, probably was undiagnosed bipolar behavior back and forth. I think I've talked about that before, where I would like date a girl and then like suddenly think like, should we even be together? I don't even think I want to be with you. Like, I don't even care. Like, I just move on. And then the time would pass where I was really up and kind of like hypomanic and then depressed. And the depression is where I'd break up with her and think, oh, I just need to like be by myself. And then I'd be by myself a certain amount of time and then come out the other side a normal person again and be like, I don't know why I did that. And then the cycle would continue over and over again. And I'd keep dating the same people over and over again. And it was an on and again, off again thing, because 72 hours is apparently the appropriate amount of time to try to get back with somebody after you break up with them, because I did it many times. And that was a terrible behavior that I hate, and think back on it, I'm just like, God, that poor soul that I don't know. It was a terrible experience. And then, it progressed and got more impulsive and more explosive and damaging in my early and mid 20s, I think. But it was never sitting in a room by myself watching an entire 8 seasons of a TV show or anything like that.
Well, and the more public things for me had to do with being on stage. Like that was sort of how, and I've talked about this, I think, in when we talked about creativity, but you make fun of me because I say this often, that I've done 7 years of show choir. And I say it because I feel like
be a t-shirt.
Yes.
Enneagram 5 t-shirt. I've done 7 years of show choir.
We're gonna start an Enneagram 5 store, sell t-shirts.
That'll be our merch.
But I say it a lot just because I feel like it explains so much about me. If you know that I'm a 5, sometimes I don't make sense as a 5, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I did 7 years of show choir. I'm like, and I think that helps people understand that
7 years is a long time.
It's a long time. Yeah.
Especially in those formidable years.
All of high school, 3 years of college. It was a lot. Yeah. My whole high school experience was basically like Glee. And there was something about, I've said before, I have this performer switch that I can turn on.
Right.
And that's where I started to learn it, because I could get on stage and I could just literally be a different person.
Yeah.
Or, literally. But like, I'm like,
literally.
I could take on someone else's persona and pretend to be them
for a time, short sprints.
Yeah, on stage, right? And it was another way of me just like numbing all of the things in my life and escaping from them. And then I kind of did some similar things, but in that mode, I can also come in to a social situation when I'm when I'm have the energy, I would say. When I have the energy, I can come into a social situation and I can turn that mode on and I can play a role of someone who is charming and engaging and that sort of thing. And I still like dabble in creating a little bit of chaos just because I kind of can't help it. But it helps me in those social situations gain enough confidence and kind of build the surface level relationships with people where when there's an opportunity, I can dig deeper, and then like I'd go like straight into, 5 mode sometimes. And I think sometimes I catch people off guard because of that. So I'm like, we go from talking about, random what's the weather to, so what is your like existential angst that you're dealing with this week?
Is there anything that's made you question like what it means to be a human?
What is consciousness exactly? What are your thoughts on that?
If you believe in the afterlife, can you defend that point? And from what perspective? Yeah, no, definitely. And honestly, like the crazy thing is how quickly we can jump into that in any context.
Yes.
And really just throw people off. But sometimes it's kind of fun to do that and just see how many people like track with you.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, it's usually the 7s and the 8s in a crowd for me, what I've noticed. It's always the people who are like, yeah, let's go there. All right, that's fine. Let's do that. And then they love being like, showboating around in a conversation and just showing what they can, what they can flex. It's funny because like in most contexts, 7s are the ones that I can usually pick out of a crowd very quickly. And usually the ones that when being fully like loud and intense are the ones that get on my nerves the quickest. But 8s can too, I guess. But I can separate the two for me. One's like impulsive and all over the place and usually ADHD, like hard to track with. And so it's really hard to have a conversation with them. And because of that reason, what are we going to do in a conversation or in a social situation? But with 8s, usually I can like latch on to like what drives them and why they are the way they are, like kind of tap into their pool of charisma and how they like dominate a room. I can usually kind of like jump on those coattails and ride that for a little bit and either go along with them in a group of people or try to like talk to them about like, how they do that or whatever the thing is. But man, 7s, it's hard for me.
Well, but here's the thing though, when 7s integrate, they integrate to a 5 and they can become like really deep and insightful, but they bring with it an optimism that we often lack. And so when I find a 7,
I'm disintegrating to a 7, that would rub me the wrong way. So maybe healthy 7s when I'm being like, if they're integrating, I'm disintegrating and we're crossing those paths. We're like 2 ships crossing in the night. It's like, nah, get out of my way. I don't want you here. You're not welcome in this space.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
I think my entire childhood and teenhood was major 7 disintegration, which I find fascinating because you think, oh, I was a total 5 as a kid. And I realize now because of all like the stress of my childhood, there was a lot of 7 vibes coming out, at least the negative 7 vibes. Anytime I'm stressed or feel like too many demands are being placed on me, instead of going reclusive, which is kind of like the 5's gut reaction, I throw my hands in the air and say, forget it, let's do it all, let's distract until we die. Maybe later I can have my alone time.
So let's talk about integrating.
I was right there with you. I was like, we've talked about disintegrating long enough. It's going to be the 2/3 of this episode. Integration, yeah.
Do you want to read the?
Yeah, let's read the thing. All right, so integration. Instead of veering towards 7 when they are stressed, 5s should move towards an 8. They have to accept that they could always gather more information, but that won't help them. They need to take action. They need to use their knowledge to do something in the real world. Stepping outside of their comfort zone and making something happen will help them to realize they are more competent than they imagined. By trusting themselves and gaining real-world experience, they discover new things about themselves and learn that real joy comes from putting their knowledge to good use. They become more confident, capable, and practical. So,
have you experienced that ever in your life?
In brief moments.
I was joking. I know that you have.
I know. When we had the conversation about doing this podcast, that was a brief moment of eightness.
Yeah. We made that decision really quickly.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I always knew I wanted to do this, and I always knew I wanted to do something with you. And when you got into your first podcast, I was like, I really want to do a podcast. I'm just waiting on the right topic, something that I know that I can just got a lot of runway. I can just carry it a while. And so when you brought me the Enneagram 5, I'm like, well, I talk about the Enneagram all the time. Yeah, we can do that. And it became what it is. And we really jumped in head first without any preparation whatsoever, which I enjoyed.
It's the way we had to do it.
We had to do it that way. And also, but that was as I've talked about before, that was really my first time of being like, you know what? It's fine that I don't know what I'm doing. We'll figure it out as we go. And it took me so long to get to that point that since then, it has influenced many moments in my life where I'm like, you know what? Let's just do it and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I think that this podcast has helped me to spend more time in the integration side than the disintegration side in other areas of my life. And I think that that's helped. I mean, when I started doing the live streaming I was talking about earlier, that was before the podcast. It was in the months leading up to us preparing and trying to decide how we were going to start recording. And it was in the beginning stages of us starting to record. It was all of that time. I was trying to do this at the same time. And I think that it was once we launched and we threw it out there and it was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I suddenly realized that maybe the best stuff that I could produce is me operating on the fly.
Yes.
And I suddenly had that realization and that kind of light bulb moment of like, maybe I have always prepared way too much for everything I've ever done. And maybe that's why my music was never as good as I wanted it to be. Like the creative side of me was never that good because I didn't have that pressure to just do it and just see what happened. And I didn't get a second chance because there wasn't time for the second chance. I just got to throw it out there. Yeah. And we to this day still operate that way to some degree because of life. And so it's kind of fun to because at this point now I'm feeling a little more confident and comfortable to even with the podcast to just be able to be like, let's play with this a little bit. Let's figure out how we can, change the production, but I'm going to do it on the fly. So we're going to see how it goes. And as I'm saying this right now, I have no idea how any of the music or any of the production sounds on this podcast because I haven't done it yet. But I know that that's how I'm going to do it because we're launching this season in 3 weeks from the time of this recording of this episode. And I haven't edited anything. So it's going to be all at once. And it's really fun, but I have some really fun ideas for this. And I'm trying to stretch myself because now we've done 2 seasons and I want to stretch myself on the fly.
Yeah.
And, I'm writing a project of music and I'm really putting myself out there and I'm doing it kind of on the fly and trying to put it all together and just put it out into the world for my own sake. And much like this podcast, it's not for other people I'm not thinking about the listener when I'm writing this. I'm writing it because and creating it because I want to and because I feel like it's something that I need to do for myself. And so, I'm interested to see how that is received differently from the things that I've done in the past. And by doing all those things and by challenging myself to not spend so much time in the preparation, but spend more time taking the first step, that was a revolutionary concept for me and a place that I enjoy doing that more than I enjoy getting stuck in the preparation. I love learning about things. I love going down deep rabbit holes into things. That's super fun. But what I've learned is that's more fun for my hobbies. That's more fun for my spare time. And so I've tried to channel that energy into reading books about things that I'm interested in, reading fictional books, doing whatever the thing is that I want to do, learning new musical things, whatever. But when it comes to, I've had to try to separate for myself into 2 halves in my life. The things that I need to get done or I want to get done are things I'm passionate about. I have to channel my 8-ness. And all that means is, for me, it means take the step. Yeah. Don't think about it. Just take the step.
Yep.
It's all I think about whenever I'm doing something. When I took this job that I have right now, I just took the step. I knew that they were hiring me based on things that didn't necessarily apply contextually with the job, but and I know that people that I work with now listen to this podcast, so I'm really glad it worked out. Just throwing that out there. Half my company knows about this podcast now. as the words were coming out of my mouth, I suddenly like had that, like I stepped out of myself. It was like, everybody's going to hear this. Are you sure they want to hear this? But yeah, so getting into that space was just something where I could have questioned myself, and I could have decided, I could have not taken that step. I could have stayed where it was safe, which was awful. Safe was terrible in that context.
Yep.
And instead I took the leap, and it's so much better. And every single day I wake up to do that job, I'm kind of taking the leap. So I'm kind of in that same rhythm, because this job stretches me more than anything I've ever done. So I think that putting myself in situations consistently where it's challenging me to be in that unknown space that I can't necessarily prepare for has also helped me, where like when opportunities come up where somebody presents something that I can get excited about, but I don't know how to do it yet, I should just say yes, because maybe that excitement that's worth pursuing all on its own. And that will help me kind of stay on that integration track and less in the disintegration and trying to implode my life, because it definitely keeps life interesting. And usually it's when I'm getting bored, that's when I start disintegrating very quickly.
Oh yeah, that's one thing we didn't really talk about.
We didn't.
That can be a huge trigger for this disintegration. That happens to me all the time when I start to get bored. I've done this over and over again in jobs.
Yeah.
I get bored, I blow something up, and usually either like be asked to leave or get in a position where like I'm just looking for an exit, right?
Yeah, you're already looking for the next thing.
I did that in school constantly, and but a lot of it came from me being bored, and I needed something to just make myself engage again, and that something was usually chaos. It was usually like
same. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely agree with that, and I would be willing to bet. Probably a lot of people listening to this would agree with that. It's the boredom that's the trigger a lot of the time, because we do operate so often in the cerebral like plane and that level, and that's not really a sustainable place to be, no matter who you are, in my mind. And you can't be there all the time, because it just, one, nobody else can be there with you.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable in life as communal beings that we have to participate in society to live. And, and it takes so much energy. So often in my life, I've just thought, I could just be left alone forever and just be left to my own devices. I used to think when I was younger, like that the epitome, the quintessential like genius musical artist was the person who was left alone to their own devices for long enough that they just created something amazing. I now know that maybe that happens sometimes, but it's usually not the case. Usually the people that I've respected the most, the people that have put out the most amazing stuff, it's because people came along beside them and helped them create something. It was usually something that actually was communal, and people came along and actually what the situation was is that people were willing to take that first step. They were willing to go out into the unknown and say, what if we try this?
Yeah.
And don't overthink it. Let's just try it. Just do it. Hit record, make the thing happen.
Yep.
And that's how things like Bohemian Rhapsody happened. That's how most of the Beatles happened. Like, and so, you think about the things that revolutionized the world, it's probably because they just took the first step without thinking about it. And it comes easier to some other people than it does for us as fives.
But you know what? That's why we start every episode. One of us, usually me, asking a question and making the other person answer it impromptu. That's never staged.
It's never staged. I never know what he is going to ask me in the beginning of the episode. I even try to stage it.
Every time I get a sense that he thinks he knows what I'm going to say, I just throw him a curveball.
Every time.
Oh, it's fun. But I partially do that just because I like tormenting you, and partially because I think it helps us like get out of our heads and stop trying to fit this into a preconceived notion of.
You take me out of edit mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
and get us into that just hit record, take action state.
Yeah, the playfulness of it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I think this is a really timely conversation for me, because I'm in the thick of this right now. I didn't have the framework of the Enneagram at the time, but I'm realizing that the journey that I've been on the last 5 years, that I think I shared at one point, of me quitting my job, starting my own business, and having any idea what I was doing, that is really what got me to start the habit of just taking action.
Mm.
And the results of that have been far beyond anything that I could have imagined, to the point where right now I'm doing the same thing by writing a book.
Yeah.
And it scares the hell out of me if I stop and think about it for very long. But I just started my writing sprint. It's a 30-day writing sprint. My target is 50,000 words, and in 30 days. And it's, I'm doing this group writing program with a small group, and my coach he has an awesome process. So we do a lot of prep work to kind of get all this stuff out of our head and create all these prompts before we jump in, so that we can actually write and not just like sit and think about stuff, because so that's what most people do is they go down to write and they're just like, what do I write about? And they just sit there thinking for 30 minutes and writing for 2 minutes. So I've gotten pretty good at actually being able to sit down and just let it come out. Every time I sit down beforehand, I have that sense of like, I don't know, there are all these voices, right? Of like, this is never going to be good. This is not going to make any sense. No one's going to want to read this. But I've learned that I have those same voices every time I'm about to do something big. I had, when I started my first podcast, when I started this podcast, when I was looking, like just starting my own business, like all of that stuff, all those voices came up. And it's when I push past those voices and just take action that the most phenomenal things happen, because you cannot anticipate what's possible on the other side of that until you do it. And then when you do, it's like, it's better than you imagine most of the time. And that's what I've experienced. And funny enough, like that's a lot of what my book is about. And so I talked about earlier, like going into a 7 was kind of like a superpower for me. But now that the more that I think about it, that was my tool for an earlier stage of my life. And now that I've grown to the point where I'm integrating towards an 8 a lot more, now my superpower is like, I can just take action on things. And it's not all the time, there's still, I still go down my rabbit trails and I still want to research stuff. And like you said, a lot of it's just, it's fun to research as a 5, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a good 65% of the ideas that we have for this podcast that have never been realized because we just haven't done them.
Right. Exactly. But we also have, as we talked about, we're able to actually just sit down and record, partially because we've been friends so long, but also because we know that we can sit down and do it. Like we've gained the confidence, but we had to take those steps first.
Right.
And that's
we didn't have that confidence on the first season.
We didn't, but we didn't, the stakes were pretty low, like we
It's
could
true.
have just thrown it away and not done anything with it.
That's true. I would say the worst episode for me to record was episode 1 of season 2.
Episode 1 of season 2, the relationships episode.
It didn't matter what it was.
Oh.
It was the first episode after we released the last episode of season 1, which was religion, right? That's what we did. So, and I thought that season 1
blew up. Yeah.
And I thought season 1 was so great. And I definitely laid out, I put all my cards on the table on the season finale of that one. And I was just like, we got to follow that up now. And I know without a shadow of a doubt, we're recording now and it's going to be released. I know it's going to be released.
Yeah.
And so I had to get through season 2. There was a few episodes in the first part of season 2 where I had to get over like kind of the anxiety of that, like the nervous jitters, just like trying to let it go and just like relax and be like, it's just like season 1. It's just like what we've always done. We talk all the time with alcohol in our hands. It's the same exact thing.
And we have our private membership podcast. So we actually do this on a regular basis now. So
now we do. Yeah, we do. Even when we're not recording, we have done very many episodes how many episodes at this point?
We just did 25 last week.
25 episodes of an entire other podcast live with no editing.
Yeah. That's the fun part, actually.
Yeah, that is kind of the fun part. And so
live streamed with participants.
Which
you know what? That's another great thing to point. Like, I don't think that, prior to us doing that podcast, or a year prior to us doing that podcast, neither of us would have ever wanted to sign up for anything like that. The thought of getting on a live stream and trying to have a conversation with the live participants like that, even though we'd both performed on stage a lot, that's different. Like you have a set and you've got music and you've got some rehearsal in there, but showing up and every single time, 5 minutes before we get on, we're like, what do you want to talk about? Well, I don't know. We'll just figure it out as we go along. And every single time, it's not always great, but most of the time we have some really great conversations and people seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah. Even when we don't talk about anything, people seem to enjoy it. I think it's always at least hopefully entertaining if we don't have anything to talk about.
We definitely cut loose a lot more on that.
We do. And I always, we definitely say a lot more. I say a lot more on that podcast. It's definitely a challenge to, and I've enjoyed this podcast for that reason. And probably season 1 was like an experiment. Season 1 was the challenge. That was the first step. It wasn't until season 2 that I had to commit and I had to say, you know what, every time we sit down, this is the step and I'm doing it and I know I'm doing it. And then I have to sit down and edit it. And I know that I'm taking that step and I got to set my perfection. I think that season 2, definitely I did this where I started setting my perfectionism aside and just deciding on creative decisions and being like, you know what? It's okay that some of this stuff is left in there. Like the episode where there was an episode that I can't remember which one it was now, Education maybe?
Where I couldn't say anonymity. Is that what you were talking about?
What was the word?
Anonymity. Don't make me do it again, bastard.
Yeah. I remember when I listened to that and I cried. I laughed so hard just listening to that, trying to edit it and trying to get through it. It took me probably 30 minutes to edit like that 3-minute segment because I just couldn't get through it. I was laughing so hard and I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to leave it. And that was a big moment for me. I was like, I just got to leave it. It's, you know what? It's fine. This can be what it is. Everything. And that's when I was like, honestly, a little bit of a light bulb moment for me where I was like, everything can just be what it is. It's fine for it to just be what it is. It doesn't have to be this preconceived thing that I have decided it is in my head. And, you know, obviously some of that happens in the production of anything, but you know, it's really fun to see that come to fruition and me make those decisions over and over again and look back and go, you know what, people still liked it and it was fine. And what if I had done that and had that thought process with everything else in my life before this moment in my life, you know, and would it have been received better? Who knows? But would I have been more proud of it? Probably. And that's a hard thing to realize, is that I overthought a lot of the stuff that I had created, and realizing that to be a 5 and also be a creator is a hard battle to fight, because you're always at war with yourself on overthinking it and making it not fun anymore, not creative, the thing about creativity a lot of the time is that it is impulsive. It is this in the moment thing, and we don't live in the moment. We're constantly fighting to be out of the moment, observing the moment. And you can't observe spontaneity. You have to be in the moment and enjoy those moments. You have to be along for the ride. And I think that a lot of my last year of my life is learning how to just be along for the ride. And that's a really hard thing for me to do. But, you know, I think about the times in my life where I have been the most at peace, and it's been with the times where I have literally been along for the ride, whether it's floating down a river, right, out of my control, and realizing, you know what, I'm just along for the ride. Who cares what happens? Who cares where we end up? It'll be fine. Or, you know, just anything that's the metaphorical version of that. And I just think that that's been a really interesting place to be. And it's definitely been, I found myself being more on the integration side of that, and finding what taking on 8 characteristics looks like in my life on a regular basis, not just in those moments where I seize the moment and I'm just like, you know, carpe diem, I'm going to be all about whatever for a brief moment until I need to recluse into myself for a week and a half afterwards.
I was in line at my usual glasses kiosk. And so again, it is a kiosk. It's not a full-blown store, so there's only one employee. There's a man seated in front of me getting help. I'm behind him. And this guy with his 3 or 4-year-old marches past the line, and he had just walked up. He had not been waiting for very long. There simply was not a long wait. So he shoots past the line from nowhere, walks up to the counter and knocks on the counter in front of the lady who's doing a task on his other guy's glasses, knocks on the counter, and she does not even look up. She just keeps working. And he goes, "I need assistance." And she's like, "Okay, well, the back of the line's over there. I'll get to you as soon as I can." He's like, "I asked for assistance right now. Stop what you're doing and help me." And she was like, "I'm not going to do that, but you can get to the back of the line." So it was one of those back and forths for seconds. This whole interaction did not last very long. And
he then makes it very personal, and he goes, "You will look me in the eyes when I speak to you. I deserve your respect. Look up from what you're doing. Make eye contact with me when I speak." That was it. That was it. So I stood up and I was like, "Get out." He was like, "What?" I said, "Get out. Not only will you not be getting help as soon as you want it, you will not be getting help today. You're done. I will get security. If they don't help, I will call the police. But this woman is not helping you today. You are done." And I looked at his little child next to him and I said, "Whatever you do not become like this man. He is a terrible example and a terrible person, and I can only imagine what kind of father he is. Do not grow up to be like him." And he was like, "I cannot believe this is happening," and left. So justice is where my 8 comes out.
You know, my oldest son turns 6 tomorrow, which kind of just blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I think that parenting is another thing that's really taught me just a lot about letting go, and like you kind of get forced to be in the flow, because when you try to resist the flow, like everything falls apart. And the best times that we've had is when I tell him, basically I let him lead and I just see what happens. And a great example of this is we went to there's a local water park / amusement park.
Small.
It's like
redneck ass.
This is my first time there. And I was like, this place is amazing because it's like just sketchy enough to be endearing, you know?
But like, will it end up on a documentary one day? Who knows?
It's like just like bordering on the unsafe enough where it's like it's
thrilling.
It's thrilling, exactly. And
I went there as a kid. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so it's a whole different experience when you like. I told him beforehand, I was like, you and I are gonna go, and it's just gonna be the two of us. We're just gonna have one-on-one time, and you get to pick whatever we do. You're leading the whole day.
Yeah, it's your agenda.
Yeah, and I did my best. It's hard to do that. Like it really is, especially when he's 5, about to turn 6, and the very first thing that he wants to do is go on the big roller coaster. He is like, and I mean, he is 48.5 inches, right?
He's not a 5'6", I'll tell you that much. If he's a 5, he's not a 5'6".
48.5 inches, which is like just over, the height.
He got there though.
Yeah.
Check the box.
And I really struggle with that for a second because I'm like, I know he's not going to like this. It's actually probably going to be legit terrifying for him. And I wanted to say something. Like I wanted to try to talk him out of it because I knew that he would be better off if I talked him out of it. But I told him that he got to make the decisions. And so I had to be along for that ride. And it's so different when the stakes are not on you, it's on someone that you care about more than yourself. And letting go of that is so hard. But I did it, and I knew that he was getting in way over his head. And we got on the roller coaster, and it legit freaked him out. And I actually took GoPro video the whole time. I haven't watched it yet, but
I saw this GoPro on your desk over here, and I was like, what did he use that for? Like recently?
Yeah, we took it the whole day. Because
That's great.
Because Amy couldn't go,
Right.
and it would have been amazing if like we could have just done it like the three of us.
Sure.
And because that's something that he has told us multiple times that he longs for is the days when it was just the three of us.
Right.
Because he's the oldest,
Yeah.
And so she couldn't go because our youngest are still pretty young. And so I took little videos throughout the day to try to help, help capture that. And
did you capture the horror on his face?
I'm sure I did. Probably the horror on my face too. I'm not a big fan of roller coasters, and that one's just like especially rough. Like it's just a really rough ride because it's so old.
Yeah.
And oh man,
No loops though, right? It's
there
just
are no loops, but man, like it's
it is rough.
It's really rough, and I felt bad for him. But I will say we got out of that, and because I was in the moment and I wasn't trying to force anything, but I was trying to like respond.
Yeah.
I recognized where he was at, and I said, you know what, buddy? I know that wasn't fun. I know that probably hurt and was probably really scary, but you know what? You conquered the biggest, scariest ride in the park. Everything else is going to be a cakewalk.
Yeah.
And it took him a little while, but within like 30 minutes, he was talking about how he like conquered the biggest ride in the park and stuff like that. And then by the end of the day, there's a little kiddie roller coaster, and which probably would have been better to start on.
Yeah.
But he got on that thing. We got on it together, and he was like, Daddy, I want to ride behind you. So like instead of next to you. So he rode in a different car, and then we got off, and he loved it. And he was like, I want to go by myself. I was like, okay. And so he went through the whole line by himself and got in by himself and like strapped himself in and like did the whole thing by himself. And he had an absolute blast. And man,
It's a big moment.
oh, so, like I've got all the feels right now because it's so so much stuff is bubbling up, like watching him grow up that way. But if I had been in that overthinking mode, we would have had a terrible day. It would not have been the same. But because I was able to just like, he helped me stay playful and stay just like in the moment and just saying, okay, yes, let's just do it. Let's just stop thinking about it and do it. And they have the lazy river, which they call the crazy river there. And I think it's changed a lot since
I was gonna say, I don't remember that.
there's a separate water park now. And that's like attached to the amusement park.
Man.
And it's a pretty nice water park. And the crazy river has at different points has these waterfalls and water spouts and little things that shoot out. And we went around that thing fucking 10 times because basically what we did was he didn't want me like controlling him in any way.
Yeah. Right.
And so I got on a raft and he basically would grab my feet because he was, he's still probably a little bit too small to like go through the whole thing without a life vest, but he didn't want a life vest. And so he would grab onto my feet or my hands and the whole time he would steer me into all of the water features. Of course I'm playing along, like making a big deal out of it. And then like there's this one part like before there's these 3 huge waterfalls and there's this little straightaway before you get there. You come around the curve and then you hit these 3 waterfalls and I would play it up every time. And like we get past these little turns and stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm glad we're here and there's no more waterfalls and it's just a nice straight time and I can relax. And he was like, well, you'll see what's coming up. I'm like, wait, what do you mean? He's like, you'll see. It's like, what's that sound? And he's like, you know what it is. I'm like, no, someone let me off this ride. Let me go. I didn't sign up for this. I just make this huge big deal. And then we go through the waterfall. He thought it was the funniest thing.
Of course, yeah.
We did that. And then the other thing we did, there's this one big water slide where we, there's like a double raft slide, and that thing, it was fast and it was brutal because at the end, there's this turn. We almost flipped over every single time. And I like a couple of times banged my elbow. I probably still have a bruise. It hurts so bad. But we went down that thing 7 times because he would get off and I was so proud of him because we got up on the first time and he wanted to do it. So we went up there and then he at the last second was like, okay, no, I don't want to do this. I'm like, okay, you don't have to do that. And the guy the lifeguard who was up there manning the ride, he's like, oh, he'll be back up here in 5 minutes. I don't know if that was that statement or what it was, but then all of a sudden he's like, okay, I think I could do this. And so he hopped in with me.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm right here with you. It'll be fine. It'll be fun. And we go down and I thought he was going to be freaked out, but he got out. He's like, let's do it again. And we did it 7 times, like in a row. We spent so long on this water. And that's another thing where I would have never chosen that for myself. But there was something about experiencing his playfulness and his joy. And it brought me back into that mode. And man, like, I don't want to get all mushy, but this is not the parenting conversation, but that's just like, I absolutely am so grateful for kids in that regard and my children because they help bring me back to that place. Cause I can be too serious sometimes,
Sure. Well, and talking about different stages of your life and how it teaches you to be like how integration versus disintegration manifests differently in different times in your life, right?
Yeah.
Side note, though, also I'm sure you realize this that you're training up your formidable opponent of manipulation and torture because the fact that he enjoys and gets so much pleasure out of torturing you. I hope that he tortures you tenfold, what you've tortured me as the time that we've known each other.
No, see,
I really love it.
I'm just going to direct all of that energy towards you.
Right.
Make Uncle Cody babysit them.
You know what Uncle Cody would really hate? Why don't you go do this?
He'll be my partner in crime.
Yeah. Oh, God. And then you got 2 more right behind him. Who even knows what personalities they will be? Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's interesting to see how that expression happens throughout life. And I mean, I've just had so many conversations recently about how it's weird to be in my mid-30s and how my experience just 10 years ago with all of this. I mean, I've known about the Enneagram for a while now and just being that self-aware and knowing that what integration versus disintegration looks like.
Yeah.
And what that journey started as in my 20s and first realizing what those tells were versus now is such an interesting and completely different experience for me. It's fun. It's fun, honestly, to see. It's weird. Nobody ever prepares you for what it's like to get older and to go through different stages in your life, really. I don't think no one really can prepare you for those things. But we try, right? You try with your son at the park, and you'll continue trying to explain what it's like to be in whatever phase of life he is in. But no one can really prepare you for when you're actually there. And I honestly feel like that this topic kind of frames that perspective, because we're talking about the highs and the lows. We're talking about fully left or fully right field. We're talking about all of the extremes of our personality and what we go through in life and what that looks like. And, we talked about in the very beginning, like, we don't like framing it in terms of health.
Yeah.
And I think that what it's more important is to take away from both the highs and the lows, the left and the right, up and down, however you want to look at it. It's life. And that's actually our bookends. That's our framework that we're working with. That's our extremes. And we learn a lot from our extremes, because that's how we decide what normal is. That's how we decide where healthy is. That's how we decide where the middle is. And, you can't have that balance without having the off balance. And I think that that's really important. I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be who I am, and hopefully a better person now than I was 10 years ago if it wasn't for the extremes that I went through 10 years ago and 20 years ago at this point. And I look back on those times, and I hurt a lot of people. I did a lot of things. I hurt myself. I did a lot of things that made me very unhappy and made life worse sometimes. But now it kind of shaped me into being who I am now. And I really appreciate those times that I can take those steps and be living and existing and operating in those places of integration and being the 8 characteristics that I respect so much in other people, and speaking from that place of authority and being able to say, yeah, look, you know what? I kind of know how to do this, and we should just take those steps and we should just make it happen. Being able to do that would never have happened if I hadn't have gone to the full extremes of the other direction, and knowing what that looks like and what that feels like. And I prefer now.
Yeah. Agreed. Well said.
Yeah.
I think that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. On to the next one, as I always say.
Cue the outro.
Cue the outro.
Hey, it's Cody, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to this episode. I also want to give a special thanks to our community members who shared their voice with us. If you enjoyed this episode and you're the type of person who likes helping others, would you do us a favor and share it with other people like you? If you found value in this conversation, they will too. If anything in this conversation has resonated with you, or if you have any further thoughts or questions, I want to invite you to join our community of other people like you and continue the conversation at Enneagram5.com.